Now, fighting rages on in unabated in East Ukraine. At least 19 people have lost their lives in 24 hours in the latest spate of violent clashes there. Officials say the victims included 14 civilians and 5 government soldiers. Pro-Russia militias say 8 civilians were killed in Donetsk shelling, while Ukrainian officials say 6 civilians died in a government-held territory. Fighting between the Ukrainian army forces and pro-Russia militias has intensified in recent months in the country's volatile east. Both sides are now moving to call up more troops. Kiev accuses Moscow of fueling the bloody feud by supporting pro-Russia forces fighting the Ukrainian government. Russia denies the allegation. For more on this, let's go to London and talk to Marcus Papadopoulos, publisher and editor of Politics First. Welcome, sir. Mr. Papadopoulos, the conflict in Ukraine is getting out of hand with the humanitarian crisis getting worse. Just why is the humanitarian cost of this crisis not mentioned as much as its political and economic ramifications?
Well, the conflict in eastern Ukraine is absolutely dreadful, but it's a conflict which is largely unknown of in the West because Western media is not documenting it. And why is that? Because Western media is a tool of Western governments, and Western governments are supporting the authorities in Kiev, namely the government of Petro Poroshenko. And Petro Poroshenko's government is waging a brutal offensive against the people of Donetsk and against the people of Lugansk. And of course, the fact that Petro Poroshenko is anti-Russian and staunchly pro-Western means that he's, in effect, has been given a blank check by Washington in particular, but also Brussels, to try and bring the peoples of Donetsk and Lugansk back under the iron fist of Kiev. Now, despite the terrible casualties which are occurring on a daily basis amongst civilians in Donetsk and Lugansk, that is barely being reported in Western media. So it's a horrendous situation that we have there, but it's all because the West is pushing ahead with trying to bring the whole of Ukraine into the West's orbit in order to encircle Russia on its western borders.
And just recently, the Ukrainian president said that he's been assured that his country is going to be supplied with lethal weapons by the West. I mean, so what are the chances for a political solution to this crisis then?
Would pour in more and more to a very large fire. We had last week in the American Senate a resolution passed, overwhelmingly passed, urging President Obama to start supplying American weapons to the Ukrainian armed forces and the Ukrainian paramilitary forces. That would be an absolutely awful situation, because that would mean more and more and more ordinary people in Donetsk and Lugansk would die because of America's push to achieve a geostrategic objective in Ukraine. But the Americans have a long history of doing that. For example, they're doing it at the moment in Syria. Why is there such an awful conflict in Syria? Because the Americans have been supporting various Islamist groups in their quest to overthrow the Syrian government. And of course, many of the arms which are being received by the Islamist groups in Syria are coming from American allies in the region, Turkey, Saudi Arabia and Qatar. So if we go back to Ukraine, should President Obama decide to start supplying American weapons to the Ukrainian armed forces and the Ukrainian paramilitary, it's going to be bloodshed in the country, but 5 times, 10 times more than what we're seeing at present.
All right, we'll leave it there for the time being. Many thanks to Marcus Papadopoulos, publisher and editor with Politics First from London. Thank you, sir.